Hello, and welcome to From Lansing with Love. I'm your host, State Representative Leslie Love. Every month, we discuss a different topic with interesting guests. I hope you will find this program both informative and insightful. Today's show is a hot topic in my district and probably throughout Michigan, and that's auto insurance. Drivers in Southeast Michigan, especially Detroit, have to deal with some of the highest auto insurance rates in the country. In fact, drivers in Detroit are paying double or triple what suburban motorists pay. Detroit's population is stabilizing with help from development like Brush Park, the city's biggest residential development in half a century. However, the high cost of auto insurance is an impediment to all residents of the city of Detroit. People considering a move to the city balk when they find out how much it would cost to insure their cars. Because of that cost, Detroit police have estimated that 60% of all Detroit drivers lack auto insurance. So we're going to explore those subjects with our guest today, and my guest is Mr. Peter Kumich, Executive Director of the Insurance Institute of Michigan, a statewide trade association representing nearly 100 insurance companies and related organizations in Michigan. With nearly 28 years of government affairs experience and 4 years as a regulator, Mr. Kumich has developed considerable expertise in the various areas of insurance. He is here today to share that knowledge with us. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate being here this morning.
Well, this is the hot topic. It's all the rage of the town. We know, we expect in the legislature, the 99th, that this will be some heavy legislation, heavy lifting to figure out how do we make rates more affordable for the residents in Michigan. But me being from the city of Detroit, I'm just going to kind of narrowly focus a portion of this conversation to Detroit specifically. And so why are the rates in the city of Detroit so much more than in other parts of the state?
Right. Well, I think you have to start from the premise of the requirement in Michigan that we carry a burden, if you will, that no other state presents on its consumers in the form of their requirements for auto insurance. As you know, we have a lifetime unlimited medical benefit as part of our policy. No other state matches that. So that kind of puts us on the upper edge of auto insurance generally. In the case of urban areas such as Detroit, we have the ability to price our policies based upon the risks that's presented. And unfortunately, urban areas suffer from something that I call environmental factors outside the control of individuals that impact the insurance losses, that impact the rates that you see. Those things are, just the density of the population. You're going to have more car accidents down the Lodge Freeway than you are out on a rural road in Clinton County or something like that. Unfortunately, things like healthcare cost more in the urban areas, and that relates back to the uninsured that present themselves at the hospitals and things like that. There's a number of factors why, but that's a widely recognized discrepancy, if you will, or difference within the system. And if we pay this unlimited medical benefit, we're subject to those healthcare costs and so forth. And unfortunately, urban crime too plays a role in some respects. The incidence of carjackings and things like that are much higher sometimes in urban areas. And all these factors have to be, actuarially determined. In other words, we have to show data that supports the rates that we charge. So the combination of the fact that we have a very high mandate to begin with in Michigan, along with the factors in urban communities, pushes those rates up to some claim are really unaffordable levels, and we recognize that.
So why aren't the rates just basically about a person's driver's record?
Well, as we've discussed before, the risk and the exposure and the experience really drive those rates. And unfortunately, in the case of urban areas, again, I call them environmental factors beyond the control of the individual. They live in an area that's more risky, if you will, in regards to auto accident claims and so forth. So it's a combination of the density, the more frequent accidents occurring, the cost of health care. Litigation costs are higher in urban areas for some reason, and I'm not even sure of the rationale behind that. But if it was purely based upon driving record, the state, quite frankly, could provide the insurance in the sense that we would kind of socialize the cost of insurance so that everybody paid largely the same rate based upon your driving record only. In fact, California has very limited restrictions on what insurance companies can use to rate drivers, and so as you pointed out to me, they have less of a range between rates between the highest and lowest, whereas in Michigan we see that's very pronounced because of the ability to match the risk to the individual driver and so forth. So it's a kind of a complex calculation, but we use many more factors in the decision-making process here in Michigan by law. The law allows us to do that, and so that kind of, in our view, gets to be a more accurate rate for the individuals versus a more of a socialized rate.
I'm going to come back and explore that a little bit more, but I'm interested to know, I understand that you have teamed up with the Department of Insurance and Financial Services for a website to teach people about what's in their insurance policy and the ins and outs of no-fault auto insurance specific to Michigan. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. drivingmichigan.org is the website, and our organization decided to put this up to fund this because we believe that consumers and legislators too need a source to go to for information on the fundamentals of our no-fault system. When I started with this organization 12 years ago, I didn't know any more than the average consumer, and I was surprised at how little I knew. We do have it's not a complex, but it's a very involved no-fault system. There's a lot of elements to it that I think the average citizen is just not aware of it because fortunately they don't have to engage in claims and so forth. But the Driving Michigan website, we're trying to provide just the fundamentals on what our no-fault system is composed of, how that's funded, and again, we get into the rating factors and what drives the costs within that system. We tried real hard not to make it an advocacy site. You'll not be asked for personal information or anything like that and get quotes from insurance companies. It's purely a consumer information site.
Right. You provided a what do you call it? A document, a research that I found very helpful that I read that has that included of what makes up your insurance. And I also read a research from the Consumer Federation of America's report when they talk about what makes what some states include in determining a rate. For a person, and they include social economic factors, a person's credit score, for example, their marital status, their education. In the state of Michigan, credit score is fair game. That is a part of an assessment that will determine your rate. Why credit score?
Well, thanks again for asking that question. Number one, the state legislature back about 8 years ago passed legislation regulating the use of credit-based insurance scoring. And I use that term a little bit differently because we don't use your typical FICO score that you see posted on the advertisements where you have a 725, it's a great credit score and so forth. What we do is we use elements of your credit record. And use those relationships to actually correlate to insurance risk. Things like your reliability in paying, on a monthly installment, on a commitment like a loan and things like that. I call it really kind of a personal responsibility quotient, and that has a large, very strong correlation with insurance risk, surprisingly. So that's used as a tool to try to measure risk into the future.
Wow. So you could just be a person who happens not to make a great income. You don't earn a higher income. And you also live in an urban environment. And so you're doubly adversely affected. And and counter to that, you can be wealthy and you live in the suburbs, but you're hell on wheels when you're out there driving. So, but yet that person will have a lower rate than the person who is a lower income, who also lives in an urban environment. It seems like that's just unfair.
Right. Well, number one, your income really has any direct correlation to your insurance risk, and that's not used
But it would in your credit report. So if I have enough wealth I can pay my bills on time. And so we're looking at credit reports as an indicator of how likely is this person to be responsible financially to
Right.
meet their obligations. And so if you're struggling a little bit more, your credit's not that great, maybe you've had a divorce, maybe there's been a catastrophe in your life and things got mucky. Or maybe you just haven't had a car in a while. And so when you get a car and you get on this insurance, and credit is one of those factors that determines, it seems to adversely affect a person with lower income because they couldn't make those obligations. Does not mean they're necessarily not going to,
Right.
but it's a factor that's kind of used against them.
Right. And again, low-income individuals can have just as a high insurance score as an individual with a lot of resources. It really gets back to the, as I say, the kind of a responsibility quotient. Tends if you're responsible in some aspect of your lives, you tend to be with the maintenance of your vehicle and your driving behavior and things like that. There's numerous studies that we can provide relative to everybody has studied this, it seems like. And Michigan law has accommodated things like bankruptcies, unusual medical expenses, so that those can't be taken into account relative to insurance credit score. So there are some real significant consumer protections in regulating the use of that practice and so forth. And the majority of states, in fact, use insurance-based credit scoring for their rating provisions.
So please tell us, why do rates continue to increase when a person hasn't even had an accident?
It's a great question. We have to remember that we pool our resources as individuals in an insurance product. Unfortunately, the things that we pay for aren't stagnant. In other words, it costs more to repair your car today than it did a year or two ago. People's wages go up, so the cost increases. Additional regulations and things of that nature. The cost of repair is driven primarily by the new technology we see in these vehicles, which is great in protecting us, and keeping us in line and almost the automated vehicles. But it's very, very expensive to replace. Even a panel in your car, I had one replaced, and it was nearly $1,200 just for the panel, to replace an electronic component. So, there's outside factors that the costs continue to escalate. So the ability to cover you for a particular incident, and that's what insurance is a yearly contract that says, if you're unfortunate enough to have an accident, we'll be there to restore your vehicle and your health, even to the point of a critical injury that lasts for the rest of your life. So those costs continue to escalate. I know that, and maybe we'll talk about it a little later, the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association just announced an increase in their rates. And again, that reflects the increased costs projected into the future. Healthcare costs aren't stagnant. The ability to treat people isn't stagnant either. We have procedures today that weren't even thought of 20 or 30 years ago. And unfortunately, they cost a lot of money, but the good part is they keep people alive. They restore their lives, whereas before we haven't been able to get to that level of function and so forth. So it's really a function of escalating costs in large part. Now, experience, the number of accidents and the severity of those accidents also drive costs as well. So again, your rates go up because your pool probably experienced an increase in those costs for one of those reasons or a combination of those reasons. So again, insurance is the pooling of risks so that those that are unfortunate enough to have a loss, they're covered, but everybody else is basically contributing to that pool.
Okay. Well, you bring up something you touched on there, the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about that as well. So we'll take a break, and we'll come back shortly, just after this. Welcome back to From Lansing with Love. I'm here with my guest, Peter Kumich, Executive Director of the Insurance Institute of Michigan. And we're talking about the basics of auto insurance in Michigan. This is such a hot topic and so many places we can go, and I probably will do a town hall in the very near future about auto insurance where we can go a little bit more in the weeds. But in the short amount of time that we have, I do want to touch a little bit on and give some context to the historical perspective of how did we get here. Michigan is in a unique situation where we're one of the few states that offer this lifetime benefit. So can you talk about our no-fault insurance system that began in 1973, and do you think this is better than the traditional tort compensation systems?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Representative. Thank you. Number one, I wasn't around during those times. I was still in high school when this debate occurred, but I can tell you from the readings that I've done, in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a real concern about the cost of auto insurance, and most auto insurance at that time was under what we call a tort system, where the individual responsible for the accident basically had to pay all the costs. The difficulty with that is that it required usually litigation to determine fault on a legal basis, and then whether or not the individual had the assets to pay for the damage that they caused and their own injuries and damages. And that system chewed a lot of the premium dollars up in the litigation costs. So there was this move, a lot of states got involved in the no-fault system, and the theory behind no-fault is that we all insure ourselves, and for the majority of accidents outside of the very critical ones, my insurance company pays for my damages, and your insurance company would pay for your damages. And what that does is eliminates all the need to litigate. It's the no-fault system. That means no one's at fault, or it doesn't matter who's at fault, at least in the less severe accidents. There are exceptions for that when there's a death or a serious impairment of important body function, as they say, or a permanent serious disfigurement. Then the individual has the ability to sue the other driver. It's somewhat limited, though, in Michigan by design. So the no-fault system, if in its inception, was really an effort to try to control the cost of insurance as we knew it back then. And I think largely it's been a pretty successful effort. What Michigan chose, though, was a little bit out of the ordinary, as you mentioned earlier, in mandating an unlimited lifetime medical benefit as part of your auto policy. There's three things we have to buy in our auto insurance policy, mandatory. One is liability coverage, and that's a policy that protects you in case you're sued. And that can happen in our system, but it's a minimal amount. And every state requires that liability coverage, whether they're a tort or a no-fault system. Secondarily, there's a property damage provision that basically says we have to have $1 million in coverage in case our vehicle damages things like a building or somebody's personal property and things like that. And actually, the $1 million coverage is actually pretty affordable because the instances rarely occur and the claims never get to that amount in large part. But the third component is the PIP, as you've mentioned, personal injury protection. And that's a combination of both the unlimited medical health care, a wage replacement for up to 3 years. That has some limits on it as far as the amount of total wages that are paid, but that escalates every year under a formula. And then they have other special services that can be reimbursed for. Things like if you're unable to mow your lawn, you can get reimbursement for having somebody do that for you, or take care of your sidewalk in the winter to shovel the sidewalk and things of that nature. So we've got a very comprehensive benefit that we're all required to purchase. And there were actually 2 other states that followed Michigan's lead back in the 70s to mandate this unlimited benefit. I believe Pennsylvania was one and New Jersey was the other. So they had a similar system as well, but ultimately decided to roll back that mandate where now they've got a minimal level of medical coverage required, and the consumer is able to purchase more if they choose to do so.
Right. I think we have a beautiful, I think the no-fault system in Michigan is really excellent. It is the Cadillac of insurance policies. And it's interesting in this conversation when we say what is driving up the cost. And the hospitals say, not us. The insurance guys say, it's not us. And so it just seems like these are random numbers, but we do know that the media recently reported reported that the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association Board just hiked its annual assessment up by $10, so it's now $170 for each insured vehicle per year starting July 1st to cover medical claims. What is why is this still increasing to go up? I think when we talked off camera earlier that the 99% of our drivers are not getting into these catastrophic accidents that would cause this. But also $170 is not a lot to ask a person that if you're part of that 1% that gets caught and has a horrible accident, that you have this lifetime benefit. So how are we balancing this?
Well, it's a good point, and the numbers show that actually the number of people going into the claims mechanism has decreased, and that I think attribute to the safety of the vehicles we're driving today. So even if you're in a very serious car accident, a lot of times because of the protections we have with airbags and other safety features, we're not as severely injured. So that's the good news. The bad news is we've got a tremendous healthcare system in this country, but it comes at an expense. As we mentioned earlier, there's procedures today that help keep people alive after an accident and restore their functions that we never saw 20 or 30 years ago. So the escalation of those costs, and that technology is expensive. And again, our mandate as insurance companies to pay all reasonable and necessary treatment for the care of the individual. It doesn't have any limitations as far as dollar amounts or treatment protocols or anything like that. Now we feel that it might be kind of a failure of the no-fault system, that not having those cost constraints. And we've worked over the years to try to inject some of those cost reforms into the system. But for the most part, why does my premium go up? Even though I haven't had any accidents. Again, you're part of a pool, and the experience of that pool is that it's going to cost more to replace that vehicle next year than it will this year. More people will buy new vehicles, so that and that's adjusted somewhat in their individual premium. You buy a more expensive car, you're going to pay more for insurance. But
here's a radical question.
Okay.
Why isn't car insurance just for cars? If you have car insurance, it is to replace or repair your car. Your health insurance is to address your medical and health needs. Why is medical in car insurance at all?
Well, great question. I think we have to go back and ask some of the legislators that originally enacted the no-fault system. And it's a great question because I get that often. People think, well, I've got health care. I don't need this mandatory health care coverage. The quandary that we're in, quite frankly, is we've grown up with no fault in Michigan for the last 43 years, and we've come to expect that benefit. And when we talk about curtailing or reducing that mandate within the legislative process, there's quite a bit of an uproar from patient advocacy groups, folks that are receiving these benefits, certainly from the healthcare system, because they benefit to the extent that our reimbursement levels are much higher than you might see under a typical healthcare. And that's kind of an anomaly in the law we'd love to fix. But right now, auto insurers and auto insurers only are basically required to pay sometimes 2, 3, even 4 times the amount that you'd see under a work comp fee schedule. And so, that helps drive up the costs as well. I think that can be fixed pretty simply without impacting the benefit for the consumer. So that's one factor that we can address as a legislature. But you're right, your original question about why don't we just insure the autos, and again, even in a tort state, you're required to carry enough liability coverage so that the innocent party that's injured by an auto accident has some claim against the responsible party. And the theory behind that is, yes, they may have health insurance, but there could be other considerations that they should be reimbursed for, pain and suffering and things of that nature, non-economic type damages. So, in a simple world, you're right. If everybody had health insurance, we wouldn't need that component of our no-fault system. We're not quite there yet. We're at about 93% insured. In this state anyways, we're one of the higher states that has, health care coverage for 93% of our folks. That's 7% that aren't covered. And there's really a lot of uncertainty with respect to the Affordable Care Act and whether or not that coverage is going to continue as well. So, there's that uncertainty. And again, I have many of the insurance executives come in from out of state and ask me, why aren't people more upset about their auto insurance rates in Michigan?
We are upset about our auto insurance rates in Detroit and in Michigan.
I say there are a number of people.
And let me, so I'm just looking at just across the state of Michigan.
Sure.
Has there been a disparity report or research on and just the price disparity in personal auto insurance from one location to the next? Because this is really adversely affecting particularly low income and urban communities. And we have to figure out a way to address this. And again, I think our system that we currently have, it's the system I grew up in, and I've been in a couple of car accidents. I've had students who had terrible car accidents, but none that permanently injured them. So it's important that we make sure that the medical piece is there. Mm-hmm. So why not, radical question number 2, be sort of like California, where the disparity is maybe a lesser percentage. The difference between the highest ratepayer and the lowest ratepayer is less than 100%, less than double. So why not balance that out throughout our state? So we're a little bit closer. No matter where you live, we're all kind of investing in the same pool of protecting ourselves as we drive or use our vehicles, and balance it out a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the ability to rate based upon your territory, wherever you are, is always a very contentious issue, no doubt about it. When I'm told that a bill might go in to eliminate territorial ratings, I say, that's fine, but I don't even have to lobby that. Because unfortunately, the people that represent, the outstate areas with the lower costs, recognize that that's asking, outstate to subsidize the urban areas. And I don't have any control over those votes.
That's okay with me.
It's about it. Well,
okay.
I know it would be the preferred scenario, obviously, for the urban ratepayers because they would pay lower costs. But again, that's kind of socializing or cross-subsidizing the rates.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, but I have to get this question in. Michigan is noted as one of the top 10 states with the most uninsured drivers on the road. How do we get our drivers insured? I know of scenarios where people are using other addresses, and I don't fault those folks because they know they want to have insurance, they want to be in compliance, but the rates are simply too high. Yeah. And so they do these type of things, and we know that that's considered fraud, as well as doctors have their role in the fraud conversation. But more importantly, people know insurance is important. They just can't afford it. What do we do?
Yeah, well, that issue is compounded by 2 things. One, I think clearly it's an affordability issue. The folks that can't afford a product go without. And the reason that's so easy to do that is because the consequences, quite honestly, maybe aren't where they ought to be. If you're driving without insurance, it's a misdemeanor charge and a $500 fine type of thing. But the reality is, if I am in an accident with an uninsured vehicle, the owner of that vehicle is denied any no-fault benefits if they're driving the vehicle. But every other occupant of that vehicle, if they don't have their own no-fault policy at home, they'll receive full unlimited benefits here in Michigan. Because a system was designed to make sure that, they're kind of termed third-party, innocent third parties, through no fault of their own. A child in an uninsured vehicle, even though his or her father may be responsible, they're an innocent third party. So the law has accommodated taking care of those folks. And actually, that claim would go against, number one, the other vehicle involved, kind of contrary to the no-fault system. And if that were an uninsured vehicle, they'd go to what's called the assigned claims plan, where they're provided those benefits, and then the cost of those benefits are assessed against every auto insurance carrier in Michigan.
Okay, wow. You know, Peter, we can have this conversation, and in fact, I'm going to invite you down to the district, and
Okay.
we'll continue this conversation and allow people from the community to get a deeper dive understanding of what makes up auto insurance. How are these prices derived? Maybe we'll even have someone from the medical community, because there's a reason why the price of medical care is higher in urban areas, because they take in a lot more uninsured patients than in some other areas. So much more we can talk about on this issue, but this is all the time we have for today. So I'd like again to thank my guest, Peter Kumich of the Insurance Institute of Michigan, for joining us. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for watching. If you have an idea for a show or you'd like to be a show guest, please contact my office, and that contact information will be on the screen. Until next time, be good to yourself and each other. And with that, we're all clear and out of here. Goodbye.